The Middle East is a region marked by a long history of conflict. From ancient times to the modern era, this area has been a focal point of geopolitical struggles, cultural exchanges, and significant historical events. The land has seen the rise and fall of empires, the birth of major religions, and countless battles that have shaped its current landscape. Recently, tensions have escalated dramatically between Israel and Syria. This escalation is not an isolated incident, but rather a continuation of a long-standing rivalry that has deep roots in the history of the region. The current situation is a culmination of various political, social, and military factors that have been brewing for years. Israel has launched a series of airstrikes and ground operations within Syrian territory. These military actions are part of a broader strategy to counter perceived threats and to assert its dominance in the region. The airstrikes have targeted key military installations, supply routes, and strategic positions, aiming to weaken the capabilities of hostile forces. These actions mark a significant turning point in the region, raising concerns about a wider conflict. The international community is closely monitoring the situation, with many fearing that the conflict could spill over into neighboring countries, further destabilizing an already volatile area. The potential for a broader regional war is a real and pressing concern. In this report, we will examine the details of Israel's military campaign and explore the potential consequences for the region and beyond. We will delve into the strategic objectives behind these operations, the immediate impacts on the ground, and the broader geopolitical implications. Our analysis will provide a comprehensive understanding of the current dynamics at play. The situation is complex, rooted in years of mistrust and animosity between the two nations. Historical grievances, territorial disputes, and ideological differences have all contributed to the current state of affairs. Understanding this context is crucial for grasping the motivations and actions of both sides. Understanding the motivations behind Israel's actions requires a look at the broader context of the Syrian civil war and the involvement of regional and global powers. The Syrian conflict has drawn in numerous actors, each with their own agendas and interests. This has created a complex web of alliances and enmities, making the situation even more intricate and challenging to resolve. The human cost of this conflict cannot be overlooked. Thousands of lives have been lost and many more have been displaced, creating a humanitarian crisis of immense proportions. Refugee camps are overflowing, and international aid organizations are struggling to provide the necessary support. The suffering of ordinary people caught in the crossfire is a stark reminder of the devastating impact of war. Despite the bleak situation, efforts for peace and resolution continue. Diplomatic channels remain open, and there are ongoing negotiations aimed at de-escalating the conflict. The role of international organizations, such as the United Nations, is crucial in mediating and facilitating dialogue between the conflicting parties. The hope for a peaceful resolution, though challenging, remains a possibility. The Syrian civil war, now more than a decade old, has had devastating consequences for the country and the wider region. The once vibrant cities are now reduced to rubble, and the social fabric of the nation has been torn apart. The conflict began in 2011 with peaceful protests against the rule of President Bashar al-Assad. These demonstrations were part of the broader Arab Spring movement, which saw citizens across the Middle East and North Africa rise up against long-standing autocratic regimes. In Syria, the initial protests were met with violent crackdowns by the government, which only fueled the anger and determination of the demonstrators. However, it quickly escalated into a brutal civil war, with various factions vying for control. Rebel groups formed, some seeking democratic reforms while others had more radical agendas. The conflict drew in regional and international powers, each backing different sides, turning Syria into a battleground for proxy wars. The urban warfare that ensued devastated cities and towns, leaving behind a trail of destruction and loss. The Assad regime, backed by Russia and Iran, has been accused of horrific human rights abuses, including the use of chemical weapons against its own people. These allegations have been supported by numerous reports from international organizations and eyewitness accounts. The regime's tactics have included indiscriminate bombings, sieges of civilian areas, and the targeting of hospitals and schools. The involvement of foreign powers has only complicated the situation further, with Russia providing military support and Iran sending fighters to bolster Assad's forces. The conflict has created a massive humanitarian crisis, displacing millions of Syrians and leading to widespread suffering. Refugee camps have sprung up in neighboring countries, struggling to cope with the influx of people fleeing the violence. Inside Syria, the situation is dire, with many lacking access to basic necessities such as food, clean water, and medical care. Humanitarian organizations are working tirelessly to provide aid, but the scale of the crisis is overwhelming. The power vacuum created by the war has also allowed extremist groups, such as ISIS, to gain a foothold in the region. These groups have exploited the chaos to establish control over territories, imposing their harsh rule on the local populations. The rise of ISIS and other extremist factions has added another layer of complexity to the conflict, drawing in further international intervention and leading to additional suffering for the Syrian people. The ongoing instability in Syria continues to pose a significant threat to regional and global security. Israel has long viewed Syria as a hostile neighbor, primarily due to its close ties with Iran and the Lebanese Hezbollah group. This relationship has been a source of tension for many years, with Israel perceiving both Iran and Hezbollah as direct threats to its national security. The strategic alliance between Syria, Iran, and Hezbollah has created a complex and volatile situation in the region. Both Iran and Hezbollah are considered by Israel to be serious threats to its security. Iran's influence in the region has grown significantly over the past decade, and Hezbollah, with its substantial military capabilities, poses a direct threat to Israel's northern borders. The presence of these forces in Syria has only exacerbated Israel's security concerns. The Syrian civil war has further heightened Israel's concerns, as the country has become a conduit for weapons smuggling to Hezbollah. The chaos and instability in Syria have allowed various militant groups to operate with relative impunity, facilitating the transfer of advanced weaponry to Hezbollah. This has included sophisticated missiles and other arms that could be used in potential future conflicts with Israel. In recent months, Israel has intensified its military operations inside Syria. These operations are part of a broader strategy to disrupt the supply lines and infrastructure that support Hezbollah and other hostile entities. The Israeli Air Force has been particularly active, conducting numerous sorties to target key installations and convoys. The Israeli Defense Forces, or IDF, have carried out hundreds of airstrikes, targeting Syrian military installations, weapons depots, and convoys suspected of transporting arms to Hezbollah. These airstrikes are designed to weaken Hezbollah's military capabilities, and to send a clear message to both Syria and Iran about Israel's resolve to defend its borders. In a significant escalation, Israeli ground forces have also crossed into Syrian territory, marking the first time in decades that this has occurred. This move underscores the seriousness with which Israel views the threat from Syria and its allies. The ground operations are aimed at destroying key infrastructure and gathering intelligence to further disrupt the activities of hostile groups. The combination of airstrikes and ground operations represents a comprehensive approach to addressing the multifaceted threats emanating from Syria. Israel maintains that its actions in Syria are purely defensive, aimed at preventing Iran from establishing a permanent military presence on its border and stopping the flow of advanced weapons to Hezbollah. Israeli officials argue that these actions are necessary to protect their citizens and deter future attacks. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been a vocal critic of Iran's involvement in Syria, and has vowed to do everything in his power to prevent Tehran from gaining a strategic advantage in the region. Israel's military campaign is seen by many analysts as an attempt to shape the outcome of the Syrian conflict in a way that is favorable to its interests. Section 5. Voices from the region, key figures and their statements. The escalating tensions between Israel and Syria have drawn sharp reactions from regional and world leaders. Iran, a staunch ally of the Assad regime, has condemned Israel's actions as blatant aggression and has threatened retaliation. Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah has also warned Israel against continuing its attacks, saying that his group is prepared to respond forcefully, if necessary. The Syrian government, while weakened by years of war, has denounced the Israeli strikes as a violation of its sovereignty. Section 6. Global reactions, condemnation, and calls for restraint. The international community has expressed deep concern over the escalating situation. The United Nations has called for all parties to exercise restraint and avoid actions that could further destabilize the region. The United States, a close ally of Israel, has expressed understanding for Israel's security concerns, but has also urged caution. Russia, which supports the Assad regime, has called for dialogue and a peaceful resolution to the conflict. Section 7. The human cost, a worsening humanitarian crisis. The escalating conflict in Syria is having a devastating impact on the civilian population. Millions of Syrians have already been displaced by the civil war, and the recent fighting is only adding to their suffering. Hospitals and other critical infrastructure have been damaged or destroyed in the fighting, making it even more difficult to provide aid to those in need. The international community is struggling to respond to the growing humanitarian crisis, with funding shortfalls and limited access to conflict zones. Section 8. A glimpse into the conflict, visual evidence of the strikes. The intensity of the conflict is evident in the images emerging from the region. Satellite photos show the destruction caused by Israeli airstrikes, with craters marking the landscape where military installations once stood. Videos posted on social media show the fiery explosions of missiles hitting their targets, while others capture the harrowing scenes of civilians fleeing their homes in fear. These images serve as a stark reminder of the human cost of the conflict. Section 9. A call to action, stay informed and engaged. The situation in Syria is complex and constantly evolving. It is crucial for the international community to remain informed about the conflict and its implications for regional and global security. We must demand that our leaders pursue peaceful solutions and provide humanitarian assistance to those caught in the crossfire. The Syrian people have endured unimaginable suffering for far too long. It is time for the world to come together and find a lasting solution to this tragic conflict. Let us raise our voices for peace and justice in Syria.